Hello, my friends. Welcome to Lindy's Magpie Reads, where I talk about the books that I read. If you're new here, a special welcome to you. I'm Lindy. I live in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. I'm in my garden, even though it's very chilly, because at this time next week, my house is going to be entirely empty. All our stuff will be in a moving truck on its way to Victoria, BC, and I'm going to be living there as of next weekend. So, taking advantage of a little bit of time in my fall garden. So, as a part of the process of moving means going through boxes of saved memorabilia and so on, and I came across documents and letters from my Canada World Youth experience. I was on an exchange with Sri Lanka in 1977-1978. The first 3 months we were in Perth, Ontario, and then the second half, 4 months in Sri Lanka. And I just had such a wonderful experience. I turned 18 years old on the trip, and I think I might insert a bit of footage from some of the stuff so I can share that with you. So I found all kinds of treasures from my trip to Sri Lanka, including this flag, batik handkerchief, and a hand-woven handkerchief. I love the feel of the textiles. I had actually used this to wrap up a little package. It was tied up in there. And when I looked inside, it was gems. There's a little amethyst and a couple of uncut stones. When I was there, I remember seeing men who were digging in the ground, very sandy looking ground, pulling up these raw gems. And when we were eating rice, which we did 3 times a day, if you encountered a little stone in the rice, then you would say that you had found a gem. I love these little painted wooden ornaments that they make there. These have been on my windowsill, so they weren't hidden away. And I have these birds as well. This is something I've been using in my kitchen ever since I came back from Sri Lanka. A spoon made from a coconut shell. And I found this string of beads that was a gift to me from somebody there. And it's all handmade. And this is the best thing that I encountered, my notebook, where I was practicing how to write Sinhalese. The first week that we were participating in the program, so this was in Ontario, there was an instructor who was teaching us basics of the language. And I wanted to learn how to write it. And he told me that is way too hard. However, he did show me how to write my name. And when we got to Sri Lanka, one of the first candies that I fell in love with, or a type of sweet, I guess I should say, is something called Nuttall. And the D sound and the L sound are both in my name too. So I could read or recognize those characters on the packaging, and I thought, this isn't so hard. And as part of the Canada World Youth Program, we were placed with families. And the family that I was placed with had a child in grade 1. So he would come home from school with his lessons, and I would sit down beside him, and we'd work together on spelling and writing the characters. These were people that were in the program with me. Yeah. So then the other thing that I found in this is recipes. I loved cooking with the families. We have hoppers with toddy and rice flour. There's egg hoppers, a milk rice. This is rice that's cooked with coconut milk, and that was my absolute favorite. Directions for making the kind of roti that they make there. String hoppers. And then I had some songs. Lots of great memories. Exciting news in Canada this week. The first First Nations Premier was elected in Manitoba. Wab Kinew, mostly known as Wab Kinew, who is Anishnaabe from the Onegaming First Nation in northwestern Ontario. That's near Kenora, Ontario. He has been a politician as well as a musician and host on CBC, and he's also an author. I have read 4 books by Wab Kinew, and I recommend all of them. A nonfiction picture book, Go Show the World, a celebration of Indigenous heroes, and the illustrations in that picture book are by Joe Morse. And he's also written a young adult fantasy series, the Floraverse series. The first one is Walking in Two Worlds, and the second one is The Everlasting Road. He's also written a memoir that I highly recommend. It's called The Reason You Walk. When Wab Kinew was a child, he moved with his family to Winnipeg, and he attended French language schools there, so he is trilingual, Ojibwe, English, and French. And he's a man who's had his share of troubles in life, alcohol addiction. He stopped drinking in 2014, I think it was. And I'm just so happy for all Anishnaabe and other Indigenous children who can look up to him and follow in his footsteps. And I'm happy for Canada. Okay, on to the books that I have finished this week, ending with my very favorite. So I'm going to tell you about 5 books. 2 of them are audiobooks. So the first book I'm going to tell you about is the audiobook Mother Tongue. It's subtitled The Surprising History of Women's Words, and it's by Jenni Nuttall, who's an English professor in England. She has chapters related to things like female anatomy and sex and menstruation and words for working women and words for various stages and ages of women, including girls, spelled many different ways, naming male violence, feminist vocabulary. And in the section on words for care, she mentions the rare but lovely nursel. This is only the second time in my life that I have encountered this word. It brings me back to the 1980s when I was editor of Edmonton's Horticultural Society newsletter, and one of the submissions, the author wrote about his potatoes being nursled in, I can't remember, some kind of, I think they were in a container rather than growing them in the ground, but nursel. And he included a note instructing me as editor, do not change this word. I want the word nursel, which I was fine with. I'd never heard it before. It sounds like a combination of nestle and nurse, and it just gives the coziest feeling. I don't think I was able to find it in a dictionary, but apparently, according to Jenni Nuttall, it's rare and lovely. I agree. The second audiobook that I listened to this week is called The Country of the Blind, a memoir at the edge of sight, and it's by Andrew Leland. This one is read by the author. He's a Jewish man who has a genetic eye condition called retinitis pigmentosa, or RP, a condition that slowly progresses through a person's life. He was diagnosed with it when he was in his teens, and his vision has gradually narrowed till he has just a tiny little tunnel. I think he's in his early 40s now, something like that. He's married with a child who's just started school at the time when he was writing this. So in addition to writing about how his increasing disability affects his marital relationship and his parenting, the difference in getting an official diagnosis of blindness and how that makes him be seen differently by people who say, like, blind people should not be raising children, for example. Lots of societal viewpoints and his own self-image as someone with low vision. He talks about carrying around a folded up white cane that he hardly ever took out because he was so self-conscious. And one particular incident in a dark restaurant where he was dining with a group of friends and his wife, and he got up to find the restroom, and he knew that he would need a cane, so he unfolded it, and his wife said something like, "You don't need that." And so he just kind of felt embarrassed and folded it up again, and a staff member there at the restaurant helped him find what he was looking for. But later, when he talked to his wife about it, she said the reason she said that was because he just looked so vulnerable and she was afraid he would get mugged or something. Yeah, so these kinds of insights into what it's like to be seen as blind, what it's like to see yourself as a blind person as opposed to somebody who has limited vision, the differences, was very, very interesting and well described. He also talks about technology to assist the blind, like the development of Braille, for example, but also the Kurzweil reader. And when I worked at the Edmonton Public Library downtown, I worked one day a week in the talking books section where we served blind patrons, including there was a once a month blind book club where people talked about audiobooks and their experiences listening to audiobooks. I wasn't the leader of that book club, but sometimes I got to sit in. Audiobook narrators make a huge difference, as you know. But those talking books were multi-tape collections, and often we had to repair the magnetic tape and make sure that everything was in order in these huge cassette cases so that someone with no vision could easily find the next one to listen to.
Anyway, the Kurzweil reader, yes. So we had one at this location downtown, and I found out they were really expensive, like $500,000 or something in the 70s, which is probably when this machine was acquired. And it was the first device that could do text to speech that recognized an assortment of fonts. And the person, Kurzweil, the person who developed it, had to combine scanning technology with optical character reading technology and automated speech technology. So I do remember that the automated speech, you had choices of which voice you wanted to hear. Perfect Paul or Beautiful Betty, I think, were two that were available. And Andrew Leland also talks about the more contemporary adaptations for the blind. That was a really good listening experience. Next up is a graphic novel memoir. So another memoir, but this one is in graphic format. And the main audience is young people from about grade 6 up to grade 9 or so. It's called A First Time for Everything by Dan Santat. Dan Santat is actually really well known as a picture book author. He's a Filipino-American who grew up in California. And he writes about how self-conscious he was when he was in middle school and just tried not to be noticed so that he wouldn't be bullied. And when he was 13, his teacher and his parents encouraged him to go on this school trip to Europe. And so that's what this memoir is about. Their experience in France and Switzerland and Germany and England, where he encountered many firsts and really got to have a much better sense of himself. There are scenes in the book that flash back to before he went on the trip, and those are all in a kind of a monotone color, and then the European scenes are in full bright color. And this is a really inspiring memoir. It just made me feel good. The reason that I picked it up is because it is on the long list for the National Book Award for Young People's Literature. And I didn't mention last week when I talked about Big by Vashti Harrison, I picked that up because of it being on this list as well. And there's at least one other booktuber who is doing the same thing as I am and picking up books as a result of them being on this National Book Award list for young people's literature, and that is Nyambura of 100 On Books. So I'm going to link their channel below. They talked about Parachute Kids by Betty Tang, which I really want to read as well. And the third graphic novel on that list of 10, the rest are not graphic novels, is Huda F. Cares. It's by Huda Fahmy. And my library doesn't have that one yet, but Huda Fahmy wrote an earlier graphic memoir called Huda F.R.U. I've got a copy of it right here to show you. I said it was a memoir, didn't I? It's not. It's auto-fiction, so it's based on her experience growing up as a hijab wearer in Michigan, in a school where there were lots of other girls also wearing hijab. And she thought that that would be just great because at her old school, she was one of the only hijabi girls. But she discovered that wearing a hijab is not character trait. And all kinds of girls wear hijab, including hijabi athletes, hijabi gamers, hijabi fashionistas. You can see her art style is very simple. She didn't fit in at her old school, so why should she fit in here? A very fun but also poignant look at figuring out your own identity. And I'm looking forward to reading the sequel, Huda F. Cares. And now on to the best book that I read in the past week, and that is Western Lane by Chetna Maroo. You probably are familiar with seeing this title because it is on the long list for the Booker, and I know why. The first person voice is so distinctive. It is the voice of Gopi, who was 11 years old when her mother dies. She has 2 older sisters, and their father is really into squash. And so he gets all 3 girls to practice squash every day. And the youngest, Gopi, is the one who's really excels at it. So even though I'm a person who's not much into sports, I could feel the appeal of why a person would strive so much and how it can help with dealing with grief. So all 3 sisters and their father are so very sad through this whole book. So it's an emotional book in that way, about dealing with grief, but there's a certain remove as well. The closeness between the sisters and their individual personalities, I think is really well done in here, as well as their father. And the other thing that's happening is their father's brother and his wife, who live in another city. They're in Edinburgh, whereas this takes place in England. We find out right at the beginning of the book that they want to raise one of the girls because they can't have children of their own. And so this looming specter of are they going to be split up is also happening. Now there's a white boy who also spends a lot of time at the facility where these girls are playing squash, because his mother works there. So I'm going to read you a passage about Jed, the boy, and Gopi, and I just want to give you a flavor of the language in this. They're at a fair. When the 5 of us, my sisters and Shawn and Jed and I, got into the car of the twister, the sun was almost above us and we could barely sit on the metal seat. It was so hot. We couldn't touch the metal anywhere. We raised our arms up in the air. My shoulders touched Jed's on one side, Cush's on the other, and we soared and shouted as the car flew up almost vertically on the rails and plummeted down. From the highest point, we spotted the top of Maksud's head and then Pa and Jed's mother smoking near the coconut shy, and we shouted and shouted until they all looked up. Our legs shook when we put our feet back on the ground. Jed's hand shot out to steady me when I swayed. I stood there dizzily staring at the mud, my heart thumping. I felt something powerful move from me to Jed, and then he let go, but it didn't seem to matter because the thing was still there. That's Western Lane by Chetna Maroo. Western Lane is the facility where they do the squash training. And this was a gift to me from my dear friend Shawn the Book Maniac. Thank you, Shawn, for this. I loved it. Okay, well, that is all I've got for you today. Thank you so very much for watching. Please let me know if you've read any of these books. Are you interested in the National Book Award long list for young people's literature? I'm going to include a link down below to that. Are you reading the Booker titles? Have you read Western Lane? Anything else that I've talked about in this video, I would love to hear from you, even if you just say hi, because I appreciate knowing that you've watched my video. So yeah, just put a little wavy hand if you don't have much time. Love you all. I will see you again soon. Bye for now.